My son, Michael, will be 52 years old in the year 2069. In fact, that's the same age I am now. So what was the future going to look like for him? Well, according to NASA, sea rise will be about 8 feet, with much stronger storms and severe weather globally. New York, Guangzhou, New Orleans, Mumbai, Osaka and many, many other global cities will be flooded and perhaps unlivable in. Tens, perhaps hundreds of millions of people will be on the move because they'll have no choice on a global basis. We will live in a world with an ice-free North Pole. Is this really the future we wanted? Now, before we worry about the year 2069, which for many of us perhaps feels like such a long way away, let's talk about the year 2019. The average speed of an Uber in New York City in 2019 was 4.7 miles an hour. That's a little faster than a normal person can walk comfortably. It's down from a heady 6.5 miles an hour as long ago as 2013. In San Francisco, your average commuter spends 100 hours a year stationary on the freeways. In LA, it's 120 hours. In Bogota, it's 190 hours. And the real question here is not those three cities, but how many of us live in communities where the traffic is getting worse? When did we think it was suddenly going to get better? Did that new road that the government is proposing actually help? Well, all roads end up getting filled up with cars because, well, I can now go more places. So that doesn't scale. So let's look at air travel. Well, air travel's been growing at an annualized rate between 6 and 8% every year since about 2006. Interestingly enough, that means that every 9 years at that rate, you double the amount of air traffic. So how long did we think we could keep doubling it before we ended up breaking it? Well, one could argue it was broken long before coronavirus made us reevaluate our lives. In fact, the CEO of Southwest Airlines stated just the other day, "I wouldn't be surprised to see business travel languish for a decade before it gets back to 2019 levels." And remember, that's the CEO of a major airline. Many people don't believe it will ever go back to what it was. And all this in a world where less than a fifth of the global population has even stepped foot on an aeroplane. So as these people get wealthier, are they going to demand to have the same life that everyone else does? So where did we honestly think all this was going? And by the way, all this moving around, all this productivity, all this extra work, well, where did it get us? Because here's the problem. The productivity of your average white-collar worker in the West has increased by less than a couple of percentage points every year since the 1980s. This is actually what's known as Solo's paradox. The computer age has singularly failed to give us, as a society, the wealth and happiness it promised. We expected to be far more productive, and we weren't. We were gypped. So what happened? Where has all my time gone? After all, it's our most valuable asset. Wealth is meaningless if we don't have the time to enjoy it. And we all have a finite amount of time on the planet. Money can come and go. Time is the only thing you can't replace. So here's the paradox. We had the tools, but we didn't use them. Simply put, we had the technology, but we failed to use it in the right way. We did electronic records and we did paper records in healthcare. It seemed education and healthcare had to be delivered in person. We were told it cannot be delivered electronically until the point where it was delivered electronically. And then they realized that actually they could get their head around it, which is great. And they also even worked out how to get paid to do it, which is even better. Now, these organizations, not really ripping into them, it's a reality, but the worst offender was the office environment. This appalling pandemic has, however, helped us understand and perhaps change the way that we think. necessity truly is the mother of invention. In fact, she's even the mother of reinvention. So at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the office was invented. It was the paperwork factory. It was located above the production area and did all the paperwork that went along with manufacturing. But before the centralization of power and machinery, artisans worked in a workshop and they had their home above it. They didn't travel to work. From the 1960s, the office was where the computers were, and people went to the office to interact with that computer. But for the last 20 years, we've continued to go to the office to use the machine, even when that machine is the internet, which is universally available. Our way of working had become muscle memory. It no longer served a useful purpose. So think about it. Why do so many of us get in the car to travel to the office to use the internet? It's nonsensical. There has to be a better way. So what becomes of this new office then if we're not there to use the internet? Well, it changes again. From a place to work to a place you go to discuss work and brainstorming and feeling part of a community and networking, and to plan and use those tools that aren't available to us all when we're working from home. The new office looks more like a lounge area with multiple meeting facilities. It'll be low density, a relaxed environment to foster social exchange and interaction, a nexus for creativity, for sociability and camaraderie. It will be full of technology and it will empower communications and interactions with clients, suppliers and colleagues, whether they're in the office today or working from home or in some distant office. So what are the ramifications of all this? Well, a lot less traffic on the roads at rush hour to start. In fact, for many, the idea of rush hour will become irrelevant. Why not leave the commute to those people who don't have the choice but to take it? Why don't we all become better citizens by using resources less in getting out of the way of those who don't have the choice? But I hear it all the time. But my team has to meet clients face to face. Nothing else will do. We hear it constantly. And I will say, as good as video is, it is not as good as meeting in person. It's a fact. We cannot as an industry fix that. However, it should be noted that face-to-face meetings really should be reserved for those important meetings. Not every meeting is a super important meeting. Many, in fact, aren't. So reserve the face-to-face meetings for those meetings that truly matter. For everything else, use video. After all, in our own research, we've discovered that our sales organizations can have 10 times as many interactions with clients over video as they can in person. They're simply far more productive. So even if, for argument's sake, a meeting is only 75% as successful over video as it is in person, if you can see 10 times as many people, you're over 7 times more productive. I find it very difficult to understand any organization that didn't see the productivity gain of that. So here's the last thing to consider. So even if you and your sales organization are perfectly happy to go and see your customers, and you've decided you don't want the productivity gain that video gives you, what about your clients? Because 30 to 70% of them aren't in the office. So you're going to meet them at their home? Probably not. You're going to meet them at a Starbucks? Well, maybe, but then you've lost most of the productivity gain of physically going to their office. And will they even let you in the office if they're there? After all, you're going to be visiting multiple offices. They may be quite squeamish about having people in their organization who isn't part of their team. So we all need to think about reinvention. So why now, right? The COVID situation has forced us all to re-examine our lives and our choices. But you could argue, well, why didn't you do this 20 years ago or 10 years ago? Well, the reality is, as an industry, as a technology, as a science, we simply weren't ready. But we are now. Video collaboration for a long time has been the domain of the early adopters, people prepared to take a risk with the idea of gaining a competitive advantage. But that's no longer true. We're now in the middle of the mass adoption of the video experience. We've truly crossed the chasm to video as a mainstream technology. In fact, video has always been, until very, very recently, a technology where there was last mover advantage. Whoever bought it last probably got the best solution, probably paid the least price for it, and had the most people to ring. And as a result, many people stood back and waited for others to invest in the technology. Well, that's no longer true. We're now in the point of mass adoption. Metcalfe's law has finally taken hold in video collaboration. Metcalfe's law states that the utility of a network goes up at the square of the number of nodes in it. In other words, the more people who use the technology, the more powerful it is for everyone who uses it, not just the new users, but all the existing ones as well. And it's why big networks take off so fast. So Metcalfe's law is finally on the side of video collaboration. So as the technology moves from early adoption to mass deployment, it must change to suit the new success criteria. Criteria for this type of customer is very different than it was for the early adopters. So in the modern world, it needs to work every single time. None of this 95% of meetings work. It has to be 99.999%. It must be familiar to a user to use whatever setting they find it in. If it's a huddle room, if it's a meeting room, if it's an auditorium, or anywhere else they find themselves with the technology, it must look and act the same way. People are more afraid of public humiliation than they are of death. They will not use the technology if they feel uncomfortable using it. And the whole idea that you can train your users needs to go away. You need to have technology that's familiar enough that once they've used it once, they can go back and use it again. Don't worry about intuitive. Intuitive is meaningless anyway. What matters is consistency, so that whenever they use it, they can use it again somewhere else. It must never need to be trained for. It must also work as part of a larger workflow. So things like IM and telephony and all sorts of other hooks into other applications make the tool useful. After all, people don't want just a single app anymore. They want a workflow, a world to live within. So the office has changed, but what about the home office? So as the pandemic started, many organizations scrambled for technology to empower their users to work from home. With a predicted 30 to 70% of users not coming back to the office, and pretty much everyone needing to be equipped to work from home if they choose, the challenge for IT departments is daunting. But for the first time, it's also possible. How do IT organizations cope with hundreds, thousands, even hundreds of thousands of users needing to work from home? Well, organizations need to realize that logistics, support, and consistent quality of experience is vital. They're looking for solutions to provide supported, globally available, scaling solutions for the entire organization, from business partners they trust and for solutions for all of their environments. The success criteria are not just about the device. They're about a family of devices that work across the world and are available around the world. Some of these home workers will evolve into super users. Taking a leaf from the high-end streaming world, they're going to build home studios. After all, if your role is to convince others of your point of view, your ability to do that is predicated on your ability to influence people. So you need to be able to put your best self forward. So this, for example, is the sort of thing you can do from your home office. So the future is not going to be what it was. And I, for one, am very thankful for that. Because to get richer as a society, we need to increase our productivity. Until now, the internet singularly failed to produce a step change of quality of life that we'd hoped for. Now we've got a golden opportunity to think and act differently, to provide the next generation with a less busy, more productive future, with more freedom to live where we want and more time to spend with those we love. All this while using less of the Earth's irreplaceable resources. We ultimately have an opportunity here. Let's take it together.